everyone? RogueGold here. Welcome back to the Division 2. Now that the public test server for Year 8 Season 1 has been up and running, people have had time to dive into arguably the two biggest additions and features coming with the new season, that being the new Escalation mode and prototype gear. There is a lot of discourse going around about these two things. If you do not frequent Reddit or Discord, there are people up in arms right now about what is being added to the game with these, which I think is too bad. And please understand, I'm saying that without the context of what these two things are. We will be diving into and discussing all of the criticism, but purely from a fundamental level, having higher difficulty challenges in the game and having something new and worthwhile to actually chase for once have been two of my biggest wishes as a Division 2 player for a long time. So I think it is unfortunate to see the volatility that these proposals have brought, but perhaps as a community, our collective discussions and ideas can help shape these things to a point where they are going to be more universally accepted. We'll see. Given the nature of all of this, I'm going to give my usual disclaimer that I do whenever we are about to deep dive on some divisive topics. Please keep the comments and discourse down below civil, especially if you're somebody who is wanting to see major change from these systems. I get that name calling and shaming might feel good in the moment, but it gets us no closer to actually proposing ideas and hopefully seeing change enacted to get these things to a better point. So we're going to talk over escalations first, which I think has received much less criticism so far, but we'll cover some of what has been said as well as my thoughts. But then the majority of the time we will dive into all of the discussion surrounding prototype gear. Both of those things will be timestamped down below, but yeah, let's get to it. So, Escalations, if you've yet to check out the PTS, is a new system layered atop the game's main missions, which allow you to go up to 10 tiers beyond heroic difficulty, and each tier will increase the enemy's health, armor, and damage. And then as you climb up the tiers, different modifiers get applied to your runs called mutators. There are either global ones that impact the entire mission conditions, or there are specific enemy mutators. I will say, for the most part, I'm really pleased with this new mode. It is exactly the kind of harder challenge that I've wanted from the game for a long time. I know many take issue with the idea that it leans further into the RPG side of things by buffing enemy health and armor. That obviously goes in the complete opposite direction of the recent realism mode that we've had in the game. I'm never somebody who's taken issue with the fact that we have human enemies in the Division and that does not make sense for, shooting guns into them over and over. But if that's you, this might not gel with you. I totally get that. But, the fact that Escalation does not impact the rest of the game's scaling, for those who are perfectly content with the current difficulty sliders that we have, but it is now there as a separate scaling mode or system that allows those of us who have power crept heroic to now finally have an outlet to truly flex our builds. As of the making of this video, I've completed tier 6. I think that is probably about as high as I will be going during the PTS. That's mostly due to the fact that my Shade Watch is unleveled. I don't have my preferred specialization unlocked. My pieces are not fantastic. So there's a couple of things working against me there, but I'm really looking forward to pushing towards tier 10 on my main account. The nice thing about these, as I think was hinted at on the dev stream, is that this system allows for the addition of further tiers in the future, right? If we continue to power creep in tier 10 becomes too easy, or if it's already too easy for some, there's been discussion of that after the PTS has been played, they could then down the line add tiers 11 to 20, 21 to 30. So it seems very future-proofed in that way, which is great. Upon hearing that though, some people might be gasping right now thinking, tier 10 too easy? What I'm watching right now looks incredibly difficult. I'm never making it that high. And look, aside from the health inflation that we mentioned, aside from a few other minor aspects to Escalation, the biggest point of criticism that I've seen for this mode is from people saying, this isn't made for me. And while that might sound harsh to hear, it's correct. The devs said specifically that Escalation is meant for the hardcore audience who has been wanting more difficult challenges within the game. For your everyday player who hops on for a few hours per week to play and mess around, many of them will likely never get to the point or feel like they would want to handle anything higher than maybe Escalation tier 1 or 2. And I think that that's okay. It would be a completely different story if this mode was required for the general game or like seasonal progression, right? If the journey missions were requiring you to climb higher and higher in the tiers, obviously there would then be issues there. But as it stands now, it is there for those who want to seek higher challenges. And this is, of course, speaking aside from the prototype gear aspect of things, but don't worry, we'll cover that next. And so I know that for some, it may suck to hear this new major feature and aspect of an update just isn't for you. But hopefully that crowd can recognize that this is not all the Year 8 Season 1 is bringing. We are getting expanded retaliation, content and features, as well as new classified assignments. Those will be playable at whatever lower difficulty you may be accustomed to. Zooming in a bit, though, So I just wanted to quickly touch on two more specific points of feedback and conversation I've seen around Escalation. The first is regarding the whole token system. Now, if you've not seen or played these, to play an Escalation mission, you must wager a certain number of Escalation tokens. You then earn a higher number of tokens back when you complete the mission, letting you then move on to your next run. But if you lose or die, that then causes you to lose whatever you wagered, and you then have to go back to tier 0, which is the current day heroic difficulty, to farm up more. So far, I've seen people making comments like, do we need this? What's the intention? These feel kind of arbitrary or unnecessary. If I had to guess, kind of similar to what we'll touch on next with the timer, I think that these tokens are here more to put intentionality behind your run, right? Escalation is not meant to be something that you log into on day 1, turn it up to tier 10, and then just throw yourself at a wall to see if it breaks. It's designed to be a more natural progression. Have you gauged what tier or challenge your build and player skill can actually handle? The tokens make you take a pause, think before jumping in, and while the added stakes of losing them on each run is kind of fun, I'm pretty indifferent to them. If the devs decided to pull them out entirely, I wouldn't really care. I'm just here for the gameplay of the new mode. On that note, the timer of the mode is then the other aspect that I've seen many people discussing. Currently, every run of Escalation presents you with a 1-hour timer. If you complete the mission in that time, then you're good. If not, you then fail and lose your tokens. And while I know there are some out there who the presence of any timer whatsoever in content causes them too much stress and ruins the experience, I think this is here purely to avoid what we've seen happen in the Division's history before, where given enough time, people will clear content that is far, far above what they can actually handle by cheesing it. Let's say if there was no timer, even if it took somebody like 4 hours, they would sit back as far as they're able to, chuck out max skill tier, max power seeker mines, and slowly but surely clear through tier 10. And so much like the token system, I think the timer is here to enforce intentionality. At 1 hour, you shouldn't have to rush through the mission too hard, but it ensures that at some level, you're actually equipped to take on the challenge that you're trying. So personally, I'm fine with it being there. Finally, then, there has been much debate on the individual scaling of each tier and the balancing of the different mutators that get applied, especially Hotfoot. I've only reached tier 6, as I said, so I cannot comment on anything beyond that. And so far, I would say things feel okay to me. As with any big new system, the balancing of this will absolutely get tweaked over time. I'm sure by year 8, season 1.1 or 0.2, we'll already probably begin to see some big changes. So just give all the feedback you can about the scaling now and at launch, and I'm sure that things will get dialed in to wherever they may be needed as time goes on. Alright, with that down, let's then move on to the much larger controversy and discussion of prototype gear. Again, if you have not been around on the internet, there is tons of debates going around about this new gear rarity, so this is likely going to take a good minute to get through, so please hang with me. I'm not going to go and recap all of the rules and details involved with prototype and its upgrades, as I'm guessing the majority of you already know that and just want to hear my thoughts on it all, so let's do that. And what I want to first address is that I think there are two glaring issues with this whole discussion, not issues with prototype itself, but with how Division 2 players perceive a change or addition like this. And to be explicitly clear, this is not me defending prototype as it is. What I'm saying is that I don't know if there are any game design changes that Massive or Bucharest could make that would change the way that people approach thinking about these topics. And the first of those ideas is that even if it is not required in any way, shape, or form, players will still chase and want to grab all of the best items that are in the game. And what I'm referring to here is that many have brought up that they feel that their progression in the game is being invalidated, and they feel insulted by the introduction of prototype gear when it is going to be immensely hard to chase. However, if you step back and you look at the game as a whole, outside of the new escalation mode, none of the game's scaling or difficulty is changing or being made harder. So, while yes, someone who is currently struggling in challenging difficulty, let's say, could probably suddenly jump up to heroic if they were given a full prototype set, for the endgame audience that already comfortably sits at heroic difficulty, given we realistically power crept past that a long time ago, the builds you use today to easily beat that content will be just as effective once Year 8 Season 1 drops and prototype gear is made available. It will truly only be necessary if you want to push the highest difficulty tiers within Escalation, which, as covered earlier in the video, is only aimed at the hardcore audience. But that all being said, there are already a number of pushbacks that people have provided about what I just said. The first is, what about PvP, right? If it's active in there, then anybody who wants a chance to compete will need to grind these hard. card. This has been a huge point that I really think should have been addressed directly on the PTS dev stream, because I think it changes the perspective for many people on prototype gear. So I do think that the ball was majorly dropped on the communication with this. But there is actually a normalization plan in place that will protect, quote unquote, certain areas of content against the power effects of prototype. This is a quote from Alex, the game director, who has shared this statement in a few different places. He says that prototype gear will be brutally normalized in Season 1, whereby the stats are going to be 1x of the prototype range and no augments. The same will be applied to raids and incursions, as now to trivialize the content, especially since we want to refresh the rewards for them, and the same for PvP, DZ, conflict. So, to be clear, as per their words, prototype gear will not work within the Dark Zone, conflict, raids, or incursions. It will have its stats set to the minimum, which is our current maximum, and the new exclusive augments they come with will be completely disabled. Now, to go off on a small tangent, this is one interesting solution to the whole problem, if you will, that people have been raising, and that's to say, why not just extend the normalization of prototype gear to everywhere in the game except for Escalation? You could do it, right? Would it devalue some of the allure of this new rarity? Sure. But as somebody myself who will be primarily utilizing the new power that Prototype offers to push further and further into the escalation tiers, I'd probably be okay with that. It would just mean that any prototype item you run elsewhere in the game is just a nice shiny min-maxed item. Otherwise it works exactly the same as an expertise 30 piece that we have now. So that is a big topic to consider, and I would definitely be interested to hear people's thoughts on that. But for argument's sake, let's say that the devs don't go down that route, right? That would be a big change. The other big argument people have is that even with the current normalization plan in place for those specific content pieces, what about everything else? If I matchmake into Countdown, Legendary missions, wherever, and I don't have prototype gear on, that makes me much more susceptible to be kicked if people are only wanting the strongest teammates. And while I agree that is true, again, it goes back to the idea that I don't know what the devs could do to fix that problem, right? That is not a game design flaw that can be solved. It is a social engineering issue that dates back to any MMO in history. KWTD, know what to do or you're kicked. Have your gear score be over X value or else you're getting kicked. This even happens now in game, right? People see a 200 shade level join their group, and regardless of their build or other factors, they'll just kick them. I think it's a stupid thing that people do, especially in content that is not that difficult and doesn't require the prestige that people are looking for. But again, that is a problem as old as the genre itself. And to bring it up, there is a keep the augments, lose the stats movement that many in the community have latched onto as for how to reduce the power impact that Prototype will have on the game. But even if you did that, right, made it so that the stats stay to our current maximums, but you just give this new shiny augment, do you not think that people won't still check to see if somebody joining their group has prototype gear? If somebody has 3, 4, 5, even 6 pieces of prototype on them, does that not reflect greater seniority or game time compared to somebody that has 0? Or even if you're just talking about the augments, some of those are still pretty powerful and would be weaponized as a reason to kick people who don't have them. So again, I don't disagree that this is an issue, but it's much more of a social issue than anything that the devs can solve in relation to Prototype itself, other than not releasing it at all. Okay, I know we've gone on several tangents here. The original topic was that people are going to view Prototype as a must-have, regardless of how true or untrue that statement may be. I've seen a lot of people equate this to a level 50 increase in the game. I personally disagree with that completely. The idea of level 50 implies that players are forced to grind to the new power cap in order to play and complete the game's content. In the Division 2's case, that would of course require refarming every build and loot piece just to stay relevant. But that's just not the case with Prototype, again, because none of our current scaling or content is being changed. But once again, I just don't know if there's anything that the devs could change that would alter how people view that. There simply isn't, right? People are going to chase the shiniest, most elusive thing. Okay, but then the other big ideological split that the community has identified is the way that people view the Division 2 at a holistic level. As it stands right now, in many ways, you can beat progression and gear grind in the game, right? You can completely fill out your library, optimize all of your pieces, get expertise 30, and be done. Now, there are some interesting events that have happened over the course of the game's life that have sort of inadvertently caused that, in my opinion, which we'll touch on in a few minutes with topics like optimization, but it is true, right? That is how the game has been. However, that goes counter to what the core of a looter shooter, at least in my eye, historically is. That being, you're never done, right? There's always something to chase, some elusive item or upgrade out there to hunt down. Prototype brings that idea back in the sense that due to their rarity and the variability on the items, you will essentially always have an upgrade to chase. The game is not necessitating that you chase them as we previously covered, but it does imply that you can no longer beat the gear grind. So speaking 100% from personal perspective, Gear 2.0 and the level of completeness that you can reach with builds is one of my least favorite aspects of The Division 2. Obviously, I play the game because I love it, and I think it's more fun than any other game out there, but it has sat in me for years that I truly have nothing that I'm chasing in a looter shooter. That all being said, some people feel the way that I do, others love the game for how it is, that it is completable, that there is an end to things. And I think that that is an ideological divide that Massive and Bucharest simply are not going to be able to solve or convince people of one way or the other. Again, I feel that this implementation of Prototype, notwithstanding the drop rates and rules to it, which we're going to touch on next, but the idea of there being a new gear chase without upping the game's level or difficulty, I think that that is the fairest and best middle ground approach that they could take to please both sides. But while I think that, I know that some of you watching view it as a betrayal and as a complete flip on what the game has been. At the end of the day, neither party is wrong. That is simply an impasse of perspective. So, when did we just spend like 10 minutes covering that? Those are the two fundamental issues with the introduction of Prototype that I think no matter what they do, the team will not be able to solve those with game design decisions alone. However, what has become clear from this PTS weekend is that there are a number of improvements that can and most likely should be made in order to make this system fairer and simply better. So, let's cover some of those now. The main topic that I've seen most people take issue with is the convergence of four main factors, that being the lack of recalibration on Prototype gear, the lack of optimization on Prototype gear, the lack of targeted loot within the Escalation mode, where these items can be farmed, and then the current drop rates within Escalation that we've seen in the PTS. In combination, all of those things are contributing to a scenario where the only true viable path to obtain a well-rolled Prototype item that is of the correct brand and gear set to fit your build is the upgrade path. The amount of RNG that is required to get a Prototype drop to begin with, right? You hope it's the right set, the right stats that you want, hope that they're well rolled. That is inconceivably low. So, in its current form, Escalation would just be farmed to deconstruct whatever drops you do get, right? You net the proto cores from those. Then people would just grind the ever-loving you-know-what out of material farms in order to continually upgrade pieces to Expertise 30 and hope for the best when they upgrade to Prototype. That is unideal, I think most of us would agree, so how could they go about improving it? The first and easiest one to tackle is the drop rates. We have no official numbers for now. All that we know is that the drop rates are meant to increase the higher escalation tier you're playing on, with the highest tier being 10. From what I've heard, and keep in mind that these are anecdotal examples as we don't have the official numbers, I've heard from more than one source that in a roughly 4-hour session of back-to-back tier 10 escalation runs, people got somewhere between 3 and 6 Prototype drops. So if you take that figure, extrapolate down to the even lower chances if you're farming anything below tier 5, let's say, it's going to be a tough time. Again, especially considering that farming these was meant to be the alternative acquisition path to upgrading if a player doesn't have Expertise 30, and because of the insanely low chances that those drops will be anything close to what you're actually looking for or need. So, the bottom line is the drop rates need to increase. I still believe that seeing a Prototype drop should be rare and exciting, but it has to be higher than it is right now. That said, we can still further improve the RNG experience by tugging on some of the other levers that we mentioned. So let's speak on the topic of targeted loot. There are many out there who wish to see the self-selected targeted loot feature of Countdown, Summit, and Retaliation be implemented to escalations. Personally, and this will likely be one of my more controversial takes of the video, I think that is a step too far. Targeted loot is a great quality of life feature that helps you cut down on excessive grind, and it helps you cut through the ever-increasing loot pool that we have, right, with new items and sets releasing each season. However, what we've seen with those aforementioned modes that let you select your own is that the grind gets cut down by such a dramatic degree that, in my opinion, it begins to detract from the looter-shooter chase and the fun of finally getting a drop that you've been looking for. So, the easiest compromise, in my opinion, would simply be to allow the targeted loot rotation that we see in the open world and missions to be applied to escalation as well. Currently, it is not, or at least it does not apply to your prototype drops. But doing this would obviously help people farm what they want once the proper target comes into rotation, but at the same time it wouldn't expedite the grind so much that it kills the chase. Since the daily rotation is daily, it can only be utilized for 24 hours at a time. That said, I also think that implementing the daily selector would offer two other distinct benefits. For one, it brings back the excitement factor. We have very few examples of this in current day Division 2, but one is when the Dark Zone has targeted ARs or rifles on any given day. Regardless of if you buy into the idea that it helps your odds to get the Eagle Bear and Ravenous and Bighorn or not, I know some people think that that is a myth, it does not change the fact that you can see the excitement tick up. Those DZ servers are usually packed. On those days, I'll get texts from my friends being like, it's ARs in West today, we're playing tonight. I think it would be cool to see that same effect apply to Escalation, right? It is targeted ARs and Striker today in Escalation. We're hunting for that prototype drop. Hop on. The other issue that implementing this would inherently alleviate, though, and this is something that would be an issue if you could manually select your own targeted loot, we get a selection of 5 missions that can be played on escalation difficulty each rotation, right? But if Lincoln Memorial is on there, along with DARPA Research Labs, do you think anyone is going to go and play DARPA? Hell no. But if the daily targeted rotation was applied and Lincoln had targeted Virtuoso, I don't know, whereas DARPA had targeted Striker, then hell yeah, you'd see people in DARPA and the matchmaking lobbies would go crazy. So just for the added bonus of there being greater variety in what escalation missions people choose to play, I think that adding in the daily targeted rotation would be great. That said, I know many of you will hate that and you will want the full selection all the time. I accept my fate on that. So just those two things alone, right, upping the prototype drop rates in escalation as well as adding some form of targeted loot would already help a lot with the drastically low RNG that people are fearing. But the conversation then extends to what one can do with a prototype item once they have it, and currently that's nothing. You are able to reroll the augment that you get, which costs protocores with each roll, but you cannot currently recalibrate or optimize the stats that you receive on a piece. Many feel that this is bad because again it goes head to head and conflicts with the rules that we've had for gear for the past many years. Once again, though, like we discussed, prototype gear is set up to be a non-beatable grind, if you will. If people could just recalibrate or optimize as easily as we can now, then you play for a couple of weeks, you get the drops you want, and then you can menu-wise them to max and be done. But I do think that there is some middle ground and compromise that could be achieved here to where we can make it so that received prototype items aren't as restrictive as they are now, but then also not entirely opening the floodgates in terms of min-maxing. So as far as recalibration, I'd be in favor of seeing that present here to some degree, probably much like we see for the augments, having to farm a few protocores, but then being able to select a stat and re-roll it would be nice. They would have to design a separate recal system compared to what we use on normal gear within the library, since we can't save prototype range stats. But at the same time, I think that is good to preserve the grind, right? Recalibration should be more oriented for allowing people to get the correct stats that they want over being an outlet to min-max those stats, because at the end of the day, prototype is still an upgrade numbers-wise over anything that we currently have, and again, without the requirement to have it for the vast majority of the game's content, I think it is okay to have to chase for a god roll again, but that's just me. So recalibrating a prototype might look something similar to what we had for the system back in Division 1, where you select a stat, you pay, and then you get maybe 3 to 5 replacement choices at random values. So, you could get super lucky and it offers you a god roll stat, then congrats, you win. But the recalibration cost would likely increase the more times that you do it, so that the focus again is on getting the correct stat over maximizing what you already have. On the topic of optimization, then, this is likely going to be my other super hot take of the video. I don't think that they should introduce optimization for prototype items. Again, I know the main pushback will be that Division 2 has had it for, 5 years now? And I concede to that point, I have no rebuttal. But what is kind of fascinating about optimization is that, at least going by the trends that the franchise has followed until now, we were not supposed to have optimization in this timeline. In the Division 1, optimization was first added in 1.8, as that was the final major update the game was ever going to receive, and so they said, hey, the game is going to be online for years to come, let's add a way for players to perfect their builds as a send-off. That's fine. Then in Division 2, it got added at the end of Year 2 with TU12. You know what else was significant about that update? Confirmed by the devs themselves, TU12 was said to be the final update the Division 2 ever got. The plans had been laid to sunset the game. It was only after it released that corporate took a second look at the game, decided it should keep going, and the rest is history. But given that track record, optimization was always intended as an end-of-life feature for the Division games. Reason being, you get to beat the gear grind. No longer do you have to search for a god roll and keep farming the game. You just need to get one properly rolled piece, or you can even recalibrate it to be proper, and then even with minimum rolls across the board, you can invest enough materials to perfect that. I mean, it is inherently, again, a system that goes against the core of what a looter shooter is. So my view is that if prototype gear is being introduced with the intention of bringing back that chase and the gear grind into the game, then optimization is just too counter to that idea. Let people farm it more easily with buff drop rates? Absolutely. Let people better target what they're looking for? Absolutely. Let people tweak a drop they get so it can better fit with their build with recalibration? Sure. But I just think optimization is one step too far. The chase should still exist for that perfect drop, and that excitement should be preserved for when you finally get a god roll. I'm sure plenty will disagree with me on that. Feel free to leave your own thoughts on it below, but that's my take. So, in terms of all of the main complaints the prototype gear has received, namely its impact on the wider game, the normalization conversation, and then the mechanics surrounding getting the items themselves with farming and tinkering, I think that is about everything that I have to say. That said, there are still a few other concerns and considerations that people have brought up to me that I think are absolutely worth addressing and would be great to hear the devs' responses to them. For one, I know there's currently a big concern that skill tiers currently do not get any kind of upgrade under the new prototype parameters. Word going around is that just giving out 2 skill tiers would make things too powerful in terms of the hybrid combinations you could come up with. I think it would be a good solution to add some amount of skill efficiency on top of the skill tier that it offers you in prototype, but obviously that is not active on the PTS, that is not addressed in the patch notes, so it would be great to hear the devs talk about that. Another, what is the rollout plan for some of the more exclusive items that are eligible to be prototyped? Namely, if we look at something like the Lexington, can you farm a prototype Lexington, or can you only upgrade one that you already have? Especially if the proposition is that upgrading and farming are both viable prototype acquisition paths, can the same be said if items like the Lexington are available via upgrade only? Also, core attributes. Maybe I really enjoy my all-yellow ongoing directive build. It's not meta, but I like it. Given ongoing is always going to roll with a red core though, and at least for now, we cannot recalibrate prototypes, is the only path to get these more off-meta rolls via upgrading? If so, given it is extremely rare to get a god roll on an upgrade, do I just have to accept that I will always have a non-maxed out prototype loadout for those builds? These and others are completely valid and important considerations in the prototype system and discussion, so I just wanted to make sure that I left room to address them here at the end. Alright, well, I believe that is just about every thought I can drum up for now on the topic of escalations, but more importantly, prototype gear, and trying to sift through and discuss all of the community's reactions that I've seen so far. Did I do a top-tier job and articulate everything perfectly? Probably not. It's been a long weekend here trying to absorb all of this and get the information out to all of you, but I did my very best here to raise the concerns that I've seen from you all online, as well as include my own perspective and thoughts on it. As always, I am eagerly curious, also somewhat fearful to see the responses to this video. Kidding aside, these are important discussions, so as always, please feel free to leave your full, unfiltered thoughts down below, just maybe without the death threats or harassment, maybe, please. I am curious to see what the devs do to respond to all of this immense feedback they're getting. I hope that we can maybe get some kind of a sit-down stream to talk through it all before the main season launch stream, but we'll see. But yeah, that's about it. I'm off to do some final PTS testing before it concludes and catch up on sleep after a hectic weekend. I do apologize for the later uploads with these past few videos. It's just been the soonest that I've been able to finish them, but especially if you made it to the end, thank you very much as always for watching. Talk soon. RogueGold. Out.